Welcome to the Revenue Builders Podcast, a weekly show featuring B2B sales leaders and executives. Hosted by five-time CRO John McMahon and Force Management co-founder John Kaplan, the show goes behind the scenes with the people who have been there, done that, and seen the results. If you enjoy our content, please subscribe, rate, and review the show to help us reach more people. Revenue Builders is brought to you by Force Management. We help companies improve sales performance, executing the growth strategy at the point of sale. Find us at forcemanagement.com. Enjoy today's episode.
Welcome to the Revenue Builders Podcast. I'm John McMahon, and I'm joined by my friend, the one and only John Kaplan. If there's ever been someone that I know that has been labeled, and definitely earned the label, of a big deal salesperson in enterprise software sales, it's Steve Waugh. Steve started his sales career doing big deals at IT resellers, Piedmont Technology and Strategic Technologies, before moving up to a startup named Blade Logic, where he did a $10 million deal. After the acquisition of Blade Logic by BMC, Steve was able to do a $40 million deal at a large financial institution. After BMC, Steve moved to Medallia, where he was considered the big deal salesperson, landing the company's largest deals every year. Currently, Steve is at another startup named Observe, where he and his sales team are producing the largest deals at the company. Let's talk to Steve about some of his best practices that he uses to produce big deals. So Steve, you've closed more, from my aspect, multi-million dollar enterprise software deals at the C-level than most reps probably see in a lifetime. So today what I'd like to do is kind of pull the curtain back on how that happened. So why don't we start at the beginning? Tell us about, let's say, the first multi-million dollar deal you ever closed. What happened? How did it go down? Tell us a little story.
So, as you recall, I started working for you in 2007. And prior to that, you had said that you'd hired me from this chicken shit little operation in Charlotte, North Carolina. I was working for a value-added reseller. I'd spent 17 years working in the value-added reseller business, selling Sun, HP, IBM, Veritas, and EMC, predominantly in the financial environment in Charlotte. And one of the biggest opportunities I had was, well, first of all, I was always working at the leisure of the manufacturer. So I was selling product, and I had to have a margin in order to get paid. I was paid 30% commission straight up, no salary. That's when men were men. And, so you lived and died off your own sword, right? And so I had an opportunity where I had broken into a couple of the banks. My first opportunity, I never will forget it, and I wish I still had it, but I sat down one day at lunch with 3 or 4 guys, and on a napkin, I didn't even have the wherewithal to write it in a binder. I don't even know if I had one. We were just talking. On a napkin at the lunch table, I wrote down what looked to be like an order that was going to shape up. And I couldn't believe it because I wrote it on this, little small napkin. And fortunately, I did have a pen with me, but no paper. And so I took that napkin back to the office, and I told the guys at the office, we were $5 million in revenue company at that time. I took that napkin back to the office, and I said, I'm going to get an order for this amount of equipment. And they said, we're not even sure we have the credit line to handle this. And I'm like, well, figure that out. That is your problem and not mine. So sure enough, there was a great deal of doubt it was ever going to happen. And so, sure enough, that's back in the day when we had dot matrix printers, and the printer started cranking out, and it just like a tractor, it was just throwing paper in the floor. POs were coming in the floor like you wouldn't believe. And sure enough, it was an $890,000 deal for a company that had a total year-end revenue of $5 million. So that led me into broadening my focus in the financial services business. Again, I was representing hardware for the most part. I was working with some of the major banks, and I never will forget. I got a major big six firm started competing with me, and I'm like, how the hell am I going to compete with these guys? They buy at 6% lower than I do to start off with, and I was already working in 4 or 5% margins. And so I told the customer, who I had really learned about champions and building champions relationships far before I met with you. You only underscored that for me, but I had built a really solid relationship with these people. So much to the point when I had a vendor come in, it was a competitive vendor. They would ask me for my shirts, my logo shirts, and they would all show up at the meeting with my logo shirts on. So I really had great control of the environment. But here's what was unique. I told them, I said, I tell you what, I said, you're going to get people that's going to answer you in an RFP. They was going to put an RFP out. And I said, you're going to get people tell you they can, but they can't. And when they tell you they can, they're going to win the business, and then they're going to make you look like a fool when it comes time to deliver. I said, put some skin in the deal. Well, what do you mean about skin? I said, make there be a penalty for not delivering. So lo and behold, the RFP came out, and I really expected it to be this bold, but it came out and it said, if you can't deliver in 5 days, from order to delivery in 5 days, it's a 25% penalty per day. Okay. So on the fourth day or fifth day, it's free. And we're talking about Big Sun, HP hardware, big business. This was 1999. Okay. And so there was one vendor that responded to the RFP, and it was me. And what I did was I basically changed the game a little bit. You remember when I interviewed you, I talked to you about alligators and bears, right? So I changed the landscape a bit. And I did that in a way that I said, I will meet your 4-day demand or your 25% penalty if we standardize on some order products, some SKUs, and we have standard builds. So they agreed to that. So I responded sort of with that as the caveat. And same company, John, $5 million in sales. We did $52 million that year. Our company went from $5 million to $72 million in sales.
Wow.
I built a complete supply chain. I had a warehouse on site at the bank. I had a warehouse in our premises in Charlotte, and I had a backup warehouse at a distributor in Colorado. And so when we pull one SKU, it flowed. I had 18 people working for me, and they were doing nothing but delivering. We were delivering big floor servers quicker than the bank could deliver a desktop to somebody's individual desktop.
Wow.
Talk to us a little bit about your mindset, the belief that you have in your mind that I'm going to go sell big deals and sell at the top of organizations. What do you have in your mind that tells you I'm going to do it?
Well, first of all, you have to believe that everybody gets up and puts their pants on the same way. I believe when I interviewed with you, I asked you how you put your trousers on every day. And you said, what do you mean? I said, same way I do, one leg at a time. So you have to believe that everybody that gets up and goes to these offices and have these C titles, they're just like us. They're looking for help, right? And so that's number one. But number two, and I think the biggest piece of being able to sell big deals is you have to believe in your product. You have to believe your product can deliver, and you have to be confident in that. Even if sometimes you're not confident, you gotta show up like, I'm here to win, and I'm going to show you how this is. And so the customers can sort of pick up on that level of confidence from you. And once you get them converted to believing, number one, and transitioning from cost to value, number two, it's really a lot easier after that point. But first, you just have to believe that you can get there, right? You can do it. You can sell. I'll give you an example of a company I worked for. I was hired to demonstrate that we could do big deals with this product. The largest deal at that time was about $7 million, and that was the only one they had. So it took about a year and some change, but I met with a particular financial organization multiple times, and I built a champion. And they asked me, said, what do you think this is going to cost me? I said, it's going to cost you probably between $17, $19 million. Okay. Well, how do you figure? I said, well, let me ask you a question. I said, do you have $10 in your pocket? Well, let's just conceptually say that you got $10 in your pocket. Pull that $10 out. I'll give you $100. Is that a good deal for you? Well, yeah, I'd do that deal any day. Pull $1 out and give them $100. I'd do that deal any day. So through that process, I've transitioned from what I call cost in the left hand to value in the right hand. If a customer's constantly looking at cost, you hadn't got them converted. You got to get them to forget cost and look at the value they're going to get. To that point, if I'm going to sell you something for $10 million and you're going to make a $90 million return, you need to quit worrying about the cost. You need to worry about the value, the transition to value. And so ultimately what happened was in this particular deal, I closed the deal at 15,500,000 for a reason. There was less signatures involved, and that was a great deal. And I never one time looked at our price guide in 8 years of working at that company. Couldn't tell you what it said, because I was value pricing it based on what value I was delivering. And every deal I did from that point on, it was just about, what do I believe the value is? Can I shift the customer to think that way? And if the customer feels there's value, then we're good to go. And I'll tell you that a second part of that. The customer came back to me after we closed that deal, had some huge success, and he laughed a little bit. He had a bourbon for me and a bourbon for him, and we sat and laughed a little bit. And he said, I got a great deal. I had $25 million budgeted. I said, well, no worries, my friend. I'm coming back for some more.
You're coming back for the other 10. Yeah.
We came back and we ended up closing it out at $34 million a year. SaaS deal.
Okay. So we got the mindset. We understand, that. Tell us a little bit about when you approach a brand new account, there's a whole bunch of people in there. Tell us how you figure out, where am I going to go to find the champion, or what's my entry point into the C-level suite? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I always try to build a pyramid from the top down and bottom up, and somewhere in the middle we may meet, right? But I believe that you focus on the C-suite first. If you can make entry into the C-suite, and certainly you have to know what C-suite's interests are, what they're espousing as they need to accomplish, et cetera. But if you can lock in on something of that nature, then you can start to focus, and then you go wide in the middle of the organization until you find out. And this is very important. You have to find out who your possible champions are, who your neutral people are, but more important, who are your enemies? Who are your detractors? Because your detractors will meet with you, they'll smile, they'll pat you on the back, and they'll cut your damn throat when you're not looking, and they can derail more big deals than you ever give credit for. The deals that we did was at Blade Logic with some of the organizations we did, that very scenario happened. So you got in this old Sun Tzu thing. You got to know who your friends are, but you got to know your enemies better, right? And so why is it that a lot of sales reps fall into that trap? They actually meet with somebody that is the enemy, but he's basically a fox in sheep's clothing, and they believe that this person has some of their best interests at stake, when at the end of the day, they're just looking to cut your throat. I think if you listen close enough and you watch their body language, you can start to figure that out. Mm-hmm. But you have to test them more than you have to test your champion, right? So you meet with them often, you engage them often, and you listen, you watch their body language, and you can tell. It's happened virtually in every deal I've ever done. There's always somebody that's a detractor, and sometimes it's as many as 6 or 7 people. And so what you have to look for too, how do you find a detractor very quickly? You find somebody who has some love affair with their own product that they've championed themselves in previous years and gotten into the organization, and to come back and have that product pulled out, they lose credibility with their past vendors. They don't look as good to the organization leaders. And many times, frankly, I can tell you more than 5 times, those people leave the organization. They see the train going in a different direction, and they're not on the train, and they change careers.
Yeah. One thing this is such an important point, because when I talk to younger sellers, but I think it doesn't matter how old you are. Some people, it's almost the name enemy, but I'm never going to change it. Because people think that there's this wailing and gnashing of teeth. There's this big old bad wolf around the corner that's going to breathe fire on you and tell you how much you suck. And I think that's what just throws people off, because that's not, definition of an enemy is somebody else's champion, which means they have more to lose. They have something to lose if you are successful. That's in right. The business world, most of those times, those people are not breathing fire and wailing and gnashing teeth. They're very cordial, trying to understand, get close to you, trying to understand exactly how your pricing goes, how your implementation goes. I see it every week. I see it every week in my own business. So, when we ask questions about an enemy, they're like, well, I'm not sure. And because they're looking for somebody that's their hair's on fire and they got a pitchfork. That's not what what it is. Steve, tell us about it.
They show up as a wolf in sheep's clothing, and you just have
100%.
you just have to be very keen. And but I think John, one of the important thing is you engage with each and every person the same way, and just champions easily will rise to the top, and detractors you can start to see move out to the side, and then you just have to isolate them. And sometimes it gets down to just a damn knife fight with them, but you just have to isolate them and but keep a close eye on them, because they're always working to break through the fence and let the cows out every single time. You just have to watch every piece of the perimeter of that fence.
Yeah. What this speaks to, whether they're an enemy or a potential champion, and where a lot of reps really leave it out, is personal win. So the person that thinks you're bringing in a brand new product might be losing control, losing recognition, feeling like they won't get a promotion, any of those personal type wins. But the flip side of it is that's what your champion's looking for. Maybe this is their opportunity to gain control over something or get recognition or get a promotion. But it always goes down to the personal win. It's not just about the technology. It's what the technology is going to do for somebody.
That's right.
Whether that's the enemy or the champion. That's
right. I always try to get with my champions and talk about how I'm going to improve their own personal resume, how I'm going to help them migrate their career upwards. And to that point, I have several scenarios where people started out in the bowels of the organization, championed the solution, and now, are senior executives of some of the largest financial institutions in the world.
Now, you talked a little bit, Steve, about isolating detractors. There's some tactical things I'd love for you to give your experience around. That is an elite skill, and I think it's one that cannot be done only by you. It has to be done with your champion as well. Could you just talk about what you mean by they go to the side and then you just got to keep an eye on them and isolate them? Give us some tactics.
Yeah. So early on, what you have to do is you have to treat them like a champion. You have to make them feel loved. You have to try and make them a champion. Yeah. But they will not become a champion, and it starts to rise. It starts to come out of them. They start sweating profusely the signs that they're not going to be a champion. You have to work your other people in the organization to help find those detractors. But more importantly, you also have to engage your own team, your own SEs, your own sales specialists that's working with you, who might get a glimpse of something you're not going to get because the detractor has dropped their guard when, I'm not in the room, the chief leader ass of the group, right? So they will start to do questions, undermine the whole selling process. And another thing you can also do in group meetings, some of these people just can't contain themselves. Yes. You get 20, 30 people in a room and you start bringing up something and they will start throwing back, I had it happen just the other day. In fact, a customer said, well, we don't want to buy just a couple modules. I'm like, we don't sell it in modules. So they started asking questions that were already leading to their confusion and looking for ways to create fodder and FUD before I even got into the deal. Fortunately, that same person in less than a week has become a champion of ours, a great champion and supporter, for one reason, because they want to come to work for us. They've lost their control in the organization they're in, and they're now wanting to come to work for me.
Johnny, there's so many skills that Steve just went over. I just want to highlight a couple of them that he said. First of all, this is the reason why you read books like John McMahon's The Qualified Sales Leader, why you standardize on common language of MedPIC or whatever your common language is. I don't know why you wouldn't use qualification criteria like MedPIC, but whatever it is, because everybody is looking for the same things. Doesn't mean everybody's going to see them, but the more eyes you have on it, the more people have a potential to collaborate and test each other. Like, I don't think that's really our champion. Last thing that I heard was when the decision criteria is beginning to be formed and you hear people speak and they sound like a competitor. Well, we don't want to buy in modules, or we don't want to do it this way. And you never said that. You know that that's coming from the competitor. And so therefore, just a little skill I'd like to help people with is when you hear that, you turn around and you ask them, what they mean by that. So somebody will say, well, we need bidirectional associativity or whatever the differentiator is. You don't jump all over it, even if you've been trained to counterbalance it or go after an objection, blah, blah, blah. You just ask. And 9 times out of 10, I find this, that the enemy, they don't even know, they can't articulate what it means to them.
Yeah.
And what experience they have with it. So I always just ask, hey, I wrote that down. What does that mean to you, Mr. and Mrs. Enemy or whatever? I don't call them that. But when they start to articulate and they have no clue or concept, everybody in the room knows it. And so you just say, okay, so are we including that in the criteria or not? And everybody else in the room is just like, no.
Right. It's funny you say that. So they'll start trying to figure out things that they're not going to do, they never were going to do, but they put that in there, and their current platform's not doing it either. But one of the best strategies I use, and you guys are old enough like me to remember the days of Columbo, right? No, what did Columbo do every time he would get in a situation like that? He'd put his hand on his head and he'd go, I might be confused a little bit here. Can you help me understand this more? And you shut up and you let them explain. And they just start digging the hole deeper, right? But you just keep pushing it back on them. And that seems to always sort of ferret it out, and you can start to move them into isolation case. But I mean, they're always in the room every time. If it's a room of 6 people, there's 1 or 2. If it's a room of 20 people, there's 3 or 4. They're always there because they're protecting their own interests and their own back.
Especially in big deals, Steve. There's just so much blood in the water that the sharks are going to be swimming everywhere. You just have to assume that there's detractors, and your job is to go figure out who they are.
An easy way to figure out who they are, you go out. Now we have Google and the internet. You go out and you Google your competitor, and you see if they are speaking at webinars for your competitor. You see if they're endorsing the competitor's products and they're slamming your products, and you can quickly isolate this person's really only caring about their own resume. They don't give 2 craps about the fact that they work for a major company. They have no fiduciary responsibility for it. They're looking after their own back.
Well said.
Let's go back to what you talked about before, cost versus value, which I really love. And I want to go a little deeper on that, because a lot of sales reps do a good job in the discovery process and they find the pain points, right? But they can't go get the multi-million-dollar deal. You've been able to not only get the discoverable pain points and understand the cost and how it's affecting the customer, but you've made a career out of taking that and extending that out into multi-million-dollar deals. Can you talk a little bit about that process?
Sure. I always look for what I think the value I'm delivering is. And I virtually every time I try to do an ROI calculation, try to build a business case, what are we solving here? What value are we giving? I had a CIO tell me one time, if you give me an in-year ROI, I'll buy every time. Meaning, if I buy 10 million, you give me 20 million in year 1, I'm sold. He and I are still great friends. He's retired now. But so what I look for, frankly, is what is that value I'm generating and how can I generate more value? And then I establish that footprint, whether, and John, be honest with you, a lot of these big deals I'm doing are north of 100 million, 400 million, $500 million in value, and it could even be higher than that. And I'm asking for a mere $15, $16 million. If you can't transition your eyes off of 15, 16 million to that 500 million I'm giving you, we've got a real problem. And that's when you get to a point and you say exactly that. I'm confused. I've got a $15 million cost and a $500 million ROI, and you're still worrying about the cost. We've got to stop. Maybe I'm not the right solution for you. Maybe you need to go do something different. Maybe I need to find somebody else to talk to. But you're not getting it, right? I mean, think about it in your own personal life. You go buy something, you look at what's costing you, what the value is. It's simple. We do it every day without thinking.
Well, what I think a lot of reps do is they do a good job, again, of quantifying business pain. They do an ROI, and they're asking for those dollars, but they don't understand the business impact at the C-level, the business impact to the company, which is much greater a lot of times, to your point, than just a simple ROI. There's a huge business impact, like you said, 15 million to 500 million. Yep. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between just a plain ROI and truly understanding the customer's business at the C level to understand the business impact.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I always do that. I always do that ROI or business impact, and I carry that with me constantly, and I pull it out in front of all the people I talk to, and I try to get them to buy into that. In fact, I did this one time with the CTO of one of the major banks, and he was going through my deck. He was just scanning through my deck, and I got to the ROI pitch. He yanked it out of the deck. It was a stapled deck. He yanked it out of the deck, and he sat there for a moment. And he said, "I don't believe this." I said, "It's your own people's numbers. Go check it." He never came back to me, closed a $28 million deal off of that. He never came back to me and told me I was wrong. He challenged me, but he never came back. So the point is, I think you have to get in the position where you test those buyers, those EBs, those C-level people, to the point that I'm telling you what I can do. If you have a better solution, what is it?
Because the other thing too.
So go ahead, Johnny.
I think the other thing that, you have to do, and over time, you'll get this in your career. You just have to know that those things come hand in hand, cost and value. I think more companies spend time teaching people about value, and they talk about value. So these reps go in there, they build, discovery. They have 2 or 3 meetings, and they've never talked about the cost of what they do. And that's okay. But what I find is it's not okay if all of a sudden you're surprising somebody and they get amnesia that, you got to spend some money. So I've always found that, if somebody asks for a cost of something, I tell them what the average cost is, and I immediately move into what the value is. But when you hedge, it's like going in and buying a new car, and you ask the dude 3 times how much it's going to cost, and they're like, well, it's the best in the market, and you get what you pay for, and blah, blah, blah. They feel like you're hiding something.
Exactly.
And I've learned the hard way myself. I still learn. I had a CEO tell me the other day, he caught me off guard. I was on a call. This actually happened to me. And I'm like CEO to CEO. It's kind of, they brought me in for that reason. And all of a sudden, the first words out of the guy's mouth is, after we had a really good conversation, he says, "Hey man, give me an idea of what you cost." And I hadn't done the due diligence with the team about what they were building, what the configurations were. And I sounded awful at the end. And the guy actually said to me, he goes, "You guys, you know how much you cost, don't you?" And I had to chuckle a little bit. I mean, it still happens to me. If I'm not prepared, every conversation I have, if somebody asks me cost and value, you got to be audible ready with it.
I mean, usually I transition to, cost is predicated on the complexity of the use cases that you're trying to solve. And Mr. Customer, we can't solve that on a first meeting. What we can do is start to hypothesize, but what we really have to do is we have to engage with you and your team and get down into the bowels of what you want to really accomplish, so that I can fine tune a solution that's going to fit exactly your needs, make you a market of one.
Love it.
Let's talk about the ROI a little bit more, though, because sometimes the ROIs do come back, and they are like excessive, almost an excessive ROI. And if you don't have the right champion when you go in to meet with the economic buyer, it almost can look like the ROIs on the lunatic fringe. Like it's just so excessive that you don't even need to have it that high. It can still have a huge business impact, to your point. But sometimes I've actually told reps, like, let's go find out what their internal IRR is and payback and those types of things. And let's tap it down. Because right now it just looks like we're almost a set of lunatics. It's so high that some people just won't believe it, especially at the C level. So let's tap it down a little bit. Have you ever had to do that?
Yeah. So yeah, I've had several ROIs come in that seem to be just crazy high. And my position on that, John, has always been, when they look at it and they're like, well, I don't believe $500 million. I said, okay, what if it's a quarter of that? What if it actually turns out, what if we missed and it actually turns out to a quarter of that, and it's $125 million. You spent, what did we say, $15 million? Is that still a good deal for you and your operation?
I've actually said that in front of C-level people when we meet with them, is, we are using your people's numbers. Here are the numbers. So let's cut it in half. Let's say your people are wrong by 50%.
Yep.
It's still a lot of value. And that's the purchase order I'd like to get. 50%.
Yeah. I'll tell you a funny story. I was dealing with, I'll just say inside the Fortune 10. And we had these conversations and they just could never get off a cost. It was going to cost us $10 million. And we kept talking about value. And they just never could do that. And they, you can either lead with this option or you can let them bring it to you. But they said, why don't you put some skin in the game? And why don't you come back with a proposal that would, put your ass on the line? So, okay. So we came back and we said, tell you what we're going to do. We're going to charge you $2 million. We're going to take 25% of the value out of 3 key metrics that you determine. And we'll agree upon that, set a contract out and march forward. And I watched their brains working. And this guy in the corner, he said, wait a minute. He said, that could be hundreds of millions of dollars. I said, well, there you go. Either buy the $17 million worth of product or let's go into a performance-based program and go to, I've done that 10 plus times and I've never had one company say, we want the performance-based model, because they really believe you're telling the truth, but they're just don't want to tell you you're telling the truth. But when you challenge them back and say, look, I'll do it for $2 million and I'll take a portion of the revenue. Not one's done it yet.
No, because they see your confidence. And then they say, he's so confident in his product, he's going to we're going to have the revenue share with him. We don't really dig that. So let's do it
watch the smoke come out of their damn ears when you say that. Their heads are turning. It's just funny to watch. But
no, Steve, when people are listening to this, you have so much experience and you have a style that is freaking like a flamethrower out on this Zoom call. Your style is very direct. It's very, that's not direct. It's warm. It's experienced. How much is, I'm leading the witness. How much is style and how much is content of what you're talking about? Because let me just give an example. What you just said is such a phenomenal strategy. You got to be able to make sure if the company says, hey, yeah, we want to do that. But like you said, I've spent my whole life doing that. And there's 9 times out of 10, they always come back and go, wait a second, if we're wrong, it's going to cost us way more. So when they ever wanted, but the confidence around the performance-based pricing, when you have reps that come to you, they watch you. How do you help them separate style from content? Is that a fair question?
Yeah, I think too often, first of all, you have to have courage. You have to have courage. You have to believe in yourself. You have to believe in your product. I think my style, I'm a good old Southern boy. You're a good Southern boy as well. I mean, we come across differently. I get ridiculed in New York, but I've been very successful in New York. You know what? My accent's what it is. I had a sales leader come to me one time and tell me that I needed to change my accent when I got to New York. And I told him, I said, I thought about it for a minute. I thought, you know what? A lot of shit can change, but my accent's not one of them. So figure out something else you want to change, but that's not happening. Right. And so I had another guy I worked for one time that said, my persona and my Southern accent was what made me uniquely different. People remember that voice, right? So, I think, I am pretty direct, John, but I'm direct in a credible way that I've done this before. And if you want to be on the winning side, I'll help you get there. Content wise, I always feel that I have to know my content fairly well in the event I get challenged, right? And I have to be able to back it up. And if I do back it up, I go to that fallback position and say, look, I got all this data from your people. So are your people not credible? Or are they not giving me the right data? If they're not, maybe we need to go back and revisit this. But the content comes from you. I'm trying to help you solve a problem. You just have to grab the rope.
I love it. I'm just making the point as people are listening here. I want you to understand that everything Steve is saying, the first thing Johnny asked him about was mindset. The next thing, and that mindset is the same, doesn't matter where you are in the world. That's a mindset of being courageous and being prepared. The next thing you talked about was breaking into the C-suite and cost versus value. Those are fundamental principles that have nothing to do with style or how many years you've been selling or how many big deals that you've done. There's fundamental principles that we're talking about here. So well done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like I said, I'll go back to one thing I mentioned before. I think you do have to understand, most products, you have to have a price. You have to have a price guide. I learned very early in my sales career from EMC, they did the most masterful job of masking what their price was. And if I was a reseller and I was selling a Symmetrics box for $500,000 and somebody else called to get that same box who was a competitor of mine, they would price it at $700,000. So, I learned very early on that you had to value sale based on the value we're delivering. It's part of product. And it's part of the process of delivery and execution. And lastly, I think you got to believe in your product. You got to have a company believes in your product. And the biggest challenges I've had in my career is my own company don't believe that they didn't believe that we could sell the product for what we could.
I wanted to ask about that. I think that's such an incredible point that you're making. Do you have what advice do you have for that $5 million company that you took them to 50 million in an order? What advice do you have for sellers that I've seen people like this. Sometimes they're almost before their time in a company. So they try to get the company to think big. And sometimes the company's not capable of thinking big. You've obviously helped companies think big. Give us some advice as we're out there selling in these companies and we're thinking big, the customer's thinking big, but maybe our company is not as sure. What advice do you have? How do you work through that?
Well, funny thing that you asked that. One particular scenario that I had was I had gotten a customer sold on the value. Customers, he agreed on the price. We were moving down a path, and I had a call with my leadership, and my leadership asked me, in particular, one person asked me, and it was kind of a hateful way of asking, but just asked me, just why do you think you could sell this deal for that much money? And I said, well, it's real simple. I've got a champion that believes the value is what it is, and you don't. So here I'm trying to sell you on our ability collectively to create a big deal, and you don't even believe it yourself. There's another tangent that happened on that one, but I think going back to what you said about if you go big, you can always go down, but you can't go up.
Yeah.
You can always say, well, I said it was 17 and $19 million, but after we looked at the use cases and after we saw it just wasn't as complex as we wanted to be, we can do it for $8 million, right? So you got to put yourself in a position to be able to navigate a little bit, but not get so damn committed that you can't move around one way or the other, right?
Johnny, you've led the Steves of the world, and not many are out there like Steve, but you've managed him several times. Give your perspective on that. So you got an elephant hunter that creates unbelievable value. He's probably going to bring to you scenarios that the company's kind of not used to doing. What thought process do you go through from a leadership perspective to figure that out?
Well, I call people like Steve, and I've had a couple other, or at least two handfuls of people over my career they're what I call artists. They do things subconsciously and naturally.
Yes.
That you have to prescribe and for other sales reps. The courage piece, understanding cost versus value, being able to push back on the customer, tying into not just the pain points, but tying into strategic initiatives in the companies, finding, hidden priorities that customers have that they're not actually public about. Those are the types of things that people like Steve find that other people just, I don't know if they're just not curious enough, just don't take it far enough, just are happy with, a $500,000 deal, a $600,000 deal. The artists aren't happy with that. They see the bigger picture. And it's really hard to your point, to teach somebody to think big potatoes instead of small potatoes.
What about when you have I'm not going to use the analogy. Johnny hates this when I do it, so I'm not going to do that. So when they come to you, Johnny, and they say, okay, we're going to need different resources. We're going to need this. I want you to give advice two ways. I want you to give the advice to the Steves out there listening on how do they best come to their company and say, hey, man, this is a great opportunity for us. And how, as a leader, do you discern whether this is like, ICP, not, just is this in the norm of what we're going to do? If it's not, how do I make a bet on it?
Well, Steve, you can speak from your, interface with me, but when he would bring me the big deal, I just tell me what we got to do because we're going to get it done. So you have to believe in people.
And you have a history with them. So you're like, okay, it's not that big of a bet.
Well, initially I didn't have a history with him.
Okay.
When I first interviewed him, he'd say, well, tell me some of the big deals you guys have done. And I named, $1 million deal, a $2 million deal. And he said, that's chicken shit. I'm going to go get a $10 million deal. And I was like, really? Okay, great. Because for me, let's see how it's done. I love that. I need more people that think big potatoes.
But in the beginning, were you set up to do $10 million deals?
Next thing you know, he did a $10 million deal, and he brought me the $10 million deal, and he said, this is what we got to do. And I said, okay, let's go.
Awesome.
If we got to change the business a little bit for those types of deals, I'm willing to do it. And some of the other people, Marty Carty and Mark Musselman and Paul and Jeremy Duggan, all those guys. Yeah. Were the artists. They could find a way to do things and not be happy with the small potato deals.
And then, Steve, from your perspective, how do you put
what John did? John, there's unique people like John. John listened, he believed, and he moved barriers that was in your way. And we had some great deals that come through under John's watch, and John, I think this is an equal component of the whole big deal business. John believed I could too.
Yeah.
And if John wouldn't believe I could, then it makes it uber hard for me to accomplish it, right? What does it say about me trying to sell $10 million worth of deal and my own leader doesn't believe me, right? And so I think that you have to have, it's kind of a two-way street. The company has to support their people to believe they can do it, and they have to have that same courage. And so what? If it don't work out, it was a damn good try, right?
Yeah.
The other thing is you have to manage these people different than you manage everyone else. And I'm kind of letting the cat out of the bag, but I would tell people like Steve Waugh, Marty Carty, the Jeremy Duggans, the Paul Kants, Mark Musselmans of the world, look, I'm telling everybody else that they have to accomplish these metrics, every month and every quarter.
Correct.
You and I are having a conversation. You don't have to. But if I hear that you're saying that you're special and you don't have to do it, McMahon told you that you don't have to do it, then I'm going to have to let you go. Because I'm running a team here and there are no special people in the locker room, right? You're the guy that catches and throws the Hail Mary passes. Great. Everybody loves you. But don't tell them that you don't have to practice when you're on the field. I don't want to hear that.
Yeah, that's
culture.
That's a major problem, John.
And those guys, just let me finish up on that. Those types of people like Steve and the other guys I mentioned, they completely understand that. They see the team dynamic. They know what I need to do as the leader. And then they don't fight you at all. They play the game. And they go, and because you're allowing them to do what they do best.
Exactly.
There are the hunters that are, that enjoy coming back to the company and explain what the company's going to have to do. And they actually get energy from that. I've seen hunters. They look like Sylvester Stallones of the world. They're out in the wilderness and they're freaking dressed differently and they're, and they're pissed off and they're like, and also they're like almost like native with the customer. I had a very close friend that this kept happening and they would leave companies because they tell me I tried to do this big deal and the company couldn't do it. And after like the third or fourth time, I actually said to the individual, hey, what's the common denominator in all those 4 stories? It's 4 different companies, 4 different products. And the common denominator was that person. So, Steve, you've obviously figured it out. It's a two-way street, as you just said. Yeah, you have to have support from the company, but the company's got to trust you to be able to come and explain the situation. You know how our operation works. You know how we're going to deliver in 5 days or whatever. Like, what are you suggesting that we should be able to do? So it's a two-way street. You can't get pissed off if your company doesn't want to do, make a Jaguar when you got an F-150 assembly line and they want you to make 5 Jaguars. You have to figure out a way to explain to them how that's going to be great for them to do that.
Yep.
Yeah, Jaguar or Jaguar? What is that?
It can be a challenge in a small company for sure. But I want to back up and address that unique people different comment you made, John. I just changed jobs, as you know, working for a company that you're on the board of 2 years ago. And I was hugely successful at the previous company. And when I left, so I see these reps come out of been hugely successful somewhere else. They go to another place and they walk like peacocks. They think they're
yes.
And I have tried to school some of these younger reps on, look, I'm an old dude. I was at the top of the ladder. I moved over to another company. My feet are firmly on the ground and I've got to climb that ladder just like you do, one step at a time. And some of these people who just can't make that transition don't fit into the culture. I'm also working with a company that I virtually am probably older than every single person in the damn company. So you have to make them feel comfortable that you're willing to learn from them, right? I'm not coming here to teach you everything that I know. I'm coming here to learn from you as well. And we're going to lock arms and we're going to make this logo, this new company, more successful than you ever thought. You got to be on the team. You can't act any different.
Yeah.
And that's frustrating, but it's so true.
Love it.
Let's talk a little bit about strategic priorities. Have you ever uncovered a hidden strategic priority, one that, it's not in the annual report, it's not in the 10K, it's not, and all of a sudden you're talking to a bunch of people and champions and all of a sudden you say, oh, no one knows that exists. I really uncovered something here.
Oh yeah. It happens all the time. I mean, I had a meeting just this past week with a major company, and we had been talking to this company now going on for 6 months. And all of a sudden I learned that there's a grid computing opportunity. There's a wealth opportunity. There's an investment opportunity. I'm like, well, hell, we've been talking 6 months and that's just now showing up. And now that looks like it might be my number one opportunity to lead into the organization is through some yet uncovered thing. Don't worry about my competition. My competition is focused on another portion of the business. There's a door open down the hall, right? So go down the hall and walk through that door. And once you get into there, you might open yourself up to a world that's much broader, right? These companies that we're selling SaaS software to in this era, there's always typically either a big deal on the front end or a small deal in a growth, right? It's a land and expand. But I've also seen some big deals that expanded. You go from a multi-million-dollar deal to the next level multi-million-dollar deal in just 1 year after only 6 months of implementing the product. So I think you gotta always be listening for a uniqueness. That's all about, that comes back to, John, what I've told you once before. What's the difference in alligators and bears if they get in a fight? It's who can change the landscape. Who puts themselves in a unique situation is who wins the battle, right? If the alligator gets on land, there's a good chance he's going to get beat to death. If the bear gets in the water, a good chance he's going to get beat. So suck your opponents out and make them fight you on an unfair level.
Love that. Tell us, have you ever had a really nerve-wracking C-level meeting that just sticks in your mind? Like, oh my gosh, that was. I
don't think anything rattles Steve's nerves. You got to ask it a different way.
Inside, he can get rattled. He may not look rattled on the outside, but when he goes home at night, he was like, holy shit, that was tough.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I had this one C-level guy. He was like a little dictator at one of the banks in Charlotte, and everybody was just scared to death of this guy. And he was notorious for picking an enemy, and he would move to that enemy and he would just attack you, and then he would move off of you and move to another enemy, and it's just a vicious circle. So I had teed up a meeting with him and my CEO of that then company, and This is funny. And so my CEO, my leader called me and said, "Hey, our customer don't want me to bring you." I said, "Well, wonder why." I said, "If you go by yourself, you've just let him beat your ass. I'm going." So we went to the meeting, and we was at a lunch meeting, and he went into this diatribe of we was talking at the time about flexible computing or computing, buying big servers and being able to slice them up into virtual servers. And so this was before virtual servers was even a thing, right? They called it at the time hoteling. You could buy a place in that server and get compute. But the funny thing about it was, John, I still to this day love this conversation. He went into this diatribe and started telling me what Jamie Dimon says and what Jamie Dimon did. And he didn't work for Jamie Dimon. And he said, "You know what Jamie Dimon something says?" He held up a paper and he showed it to me about all this hotel. He went on this for 30 minutes. And I looked at him after he got done and he said, "What is your comment to that?" I said, "I didn't say anything about any of that shit. I don't know where you're coming up with it at." And I totally disfused him. And my leader looked at me like, "I can't believe you said that." But I said, What are you talking about? I wasn't talking about what you just went off on a tangent about at all. Let me tell you about my plan. And I told him about my plan, and he said, "Oh, well, I didn't understand that." I'm like, "Well, there you go. Sometimes you should listen more and shut the fuck up, So, but I remember that. That was a great. That was an era 2000, right before I came to work for you, probably 2005.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about, which I talk about, is as you move up the ladder, what a lot of reps don't understand is, I always say that as you go up the ladder, the eyes of the executives get bigger. They see the world differently. And that the language that you have to speak as you move up has to change also, because too many reps are speaking the same language at every step of the ladder, and then they get relegated down. They just don't see the world the same way that the executives see it as you move up the ladder. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think it nets out to a very simple couple words. That any executives really don't care how you do it. They care about the so what. So what? What are you going to do for me? They don't care that we have this fancy compute engine and all this intelligence. They don't care about that. You say you could deliver 100 million. Can you do it? Do you have references where you've done it before? Tell me how you're going to do it. But I don't need to know the details of how the engine runs, right? And what I see
what Steve said right there, Cap, which is the difference. Yeah. He didn't say anything about his technology. He said, "Can you deliver the 100 million?" And that's all they want to know. They don't really want to know. It's the old drill bit story. People don't buy the drill and the drill bit. They want the half-inch hole in a piece of wood, right?
That's what I tell you on the golf course.
Hole in a piece of the wood, great.
That's what I tell you on the golf course when you tell me I'm lucky to get a par. I say it doesn't matter how I got there. It just matters that I got there in the right number.
And it's actually pretty impressive because most of the time you're in the woods. So it is impressive. It's a different game when you play golf.
It's just hurtful. It's hurtful, Steve. Hurtful.
Well, I can imagine. I can imagine. So I don't want to even play golf with either one of you guys. Somebody told me one time, as you can see, I hunt, and my pastime is hunting. And a guy told me one time I was playing golf with him. He said, "I know that you like to hunt and you like to be in the woods, but golf is not a game of being in the woods. How about trying to stay out of them?"
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Hey, Steve, I'm dying to ask you this question. Have you ever been on the leadership? That's not a good way to say it. Have you chosen a career to be a large game hunter on an individual contributor side? If that, in fact, is your choice, what advice do you give to people that are trying to figure out? You've obviously made a crap ton of money hunting the big game. What advice do you give people on career pathing?
Yeah, funny you should ask that. So I am actually, for the last 7 or 8 years, I've been a leader, but I've been a leader in a way that's kind of a hybrid role where I could, I have 3 reports, and my 3 reports would be more your varsity level players and I've taught them in some cases some things, helped move them into the right position. But when I left the last company I was working for, I was doing three people on a team was doing 28.5% of the entire company's revenue. And so I think of it, John, like, and I hate to use this analogy, but it's kind of like I'm leading a team of Navy SEALs. They're special. Oh, yeah. And I don't want to say that to detract from Navy SEALs. They're highly successful people. But what they do is they have trained, they execute flawlessly. And the key thing is they never quit training. They never get too good. It's when you get to feeling like you're better than everybody else and you're too good, that's when you get a bullet. They constantly train. So my teams, I refer to them as the SEALs because they're uniquely qualified for what they're doing. We're chasing high value targets, and we have a set of skills that typically nobody else, well, it's seldom found. Anybody can do this. You just got to slow down and think about it. So from an individual contributor perspective, I started moving into sort of a small team management role in 2015, and I've been in that since then, and I love it because it gives me the ability to still be immersed in a deal, still fight the battle. It's like I'm carrying the bag, but I still don't have to do all them damn PowerPoints. Conversely speaking, I don't really want to be a CRO. I don't really want to be that level because there's so much other noise you got to deal with outside of just the execution and the battle, right?
Keeps you in the hunt.
Yeah. I mean, it's just too much noise. I'm a keep it simple, stupid guy. Just keep it simple, execute, stay focused on the fundamentals, and you'll be all right.
Amazing.
I feel like we got a masterclass for the audience in big deal selling from Steve Waugh.
Johnny, the thing that is amazing is that, Steve, you're so humble. Like, we didn't like the size of these deals for the years that you've been doing them is, I'm not sure it's matched out there, Johnny. I mean,
he went from Blade Logic. He was doing $10 million deals. He went over to BMC and he was doing over $40 million deals.
Yeah. Congratulations on a great run, buddy.
Look, it's not without the help of you guys. John, I met you when I got to Blade Logic. McMahon was the first time I met with McMahon. I felt a little inferior. I was coming into a group of people. Hell, everybody worked for PTC. I worked for a chicken shit value-added reseller. But John took a chance on me, and I appreciated that. And one morning, I'll never forget this. It's a funny story. John, I was taking my daughters to school. It was about 7:30, and John calls me. He said at this time, he was a VP of Worldwide Sales at BMC. And he called me, and I saw it was John McMahon at 7:30. I'm like, what the hell is he calling me for? And Johnny, he kind of whispered. He said, "Hey, Stevie." He said, "What you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm just driving at the moment. John, what can I do for you?" He said, "I want you to do me a favor." And this is where I got a little careless. I said, "Well, it depends on what it pays, John." And I said, "Stop." I said, "Stop. It doesn't matter what it pays. What do you want?" He said, "I want you to lead Bank of America Worldwide for BMC." And I said, "Done." I didn't care what it paid. And the reason I didn't care what it paid was because I knew that I'd worked for John and he'd always taken good care of me. That's the kind of leader you're looking for. He for him to have that level of confidence in me that I could do that was just laid on my shoulders like a huge weight. But at the same time, I wasn't afraid of it. I loved it. I got a guy who's a legend in sales delivery, sales leadership that's calling my country ass to run a worldwide company the size of Bank of America. And I just felt like, I gotta deliver. I can't let this guy down. We went on to we did a couple of deals there, but we went on to do best year I had was $72 million. And
holy smokes.
Yeah.
That started though out of our relationship with Bank of America in 2007 when I was at Blade Logic with a little $8 million deal. And we were doing, tying this all back together. We had done a value analysis. Vic Ishnavi had done a value analysis for us. And we thought it was around $42 million on an $8 million spend. And what we found out is Blade Logic was producing an ROI every 3.5 months. And so my position changed with the bank in terms of, look, you bought 25,000 servers. You can't afford not to have Blade Logic on these servers, because after 3.5 months, you're losing money. And so when I got to the pinnacle of that relationship, there was over 150,000 licenses, and just the rest is history. But I mean, it's a you got to have great leaders, and you got to have people that can believe. You got to have people that can support you. If you ain't got that, it's just tough to say that you have to go fight your own people to sell a deal that your customer believes in.
Amen. I got one for him, Johnny. Ready? Steve, Johnny, the difference between Steve and others who say they do big deals is like the chicken and the hog at your breakfast. Are you ready, Steve? The chickens are involved, but the hog is committed to your breakfast. And Steve, you are committed to the game, committed to the science and art of selling. And we're really, really appreciative you took the time to be here.
Hey, it's an honor. I was wondering actually how long it was going to take me to get to this level, but it's an honor, So I relish the opportunity to work with you guys. I've always been very fond of the leadership you guys bring, and we've had some great times together.
Amen.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve Waugh. Thank you, Johnny Cap. Thanks to everyone for listening to another episode of the Revenue Builders Podcast.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to check us out at forcemanagement.com.